The third part of our lesson on representing data and histograms is on visualizing data. We're going to be looking at different ways we can represent our data visually. So the most common way we see data presented is in a table of values. Okay, one of the things a table of values should have is that it should have a descriptive title. Okay, that describes essentially all those important questions that we expect to know about data. So it should tell us who's represented in the data, what it's measuring or what was being studied. It should measure or tell us when the data was collected, and if possible also where the data was collected. Okay, if there's any sources of data, right? If there's raw data available, we might see a link to the raw data, as well as so that reference is shown, as well as a summary of the data. Okay, one of the issues though is in raw data form, right? It's not always easy to see trends. And so various graphs are used instead of just seeing data in table form. Okay. So the most common type of graph that we'll see represented are bar graphs. Okay, so we're going to talk about bar graphs versus something else called histograms later, but bar graphs are always used for qualitative data. If it's quantitative data, we should be using something called a histogram instead, but that's not always done, but that is something that we're going to focus on here. So bar graphs are good for qualitative data. And it's important to consider if the categories are ordinal or not. Remember, we talked about how ordinal categories can be ranked. So in a future activity, you're going to be making bar graphs in Excel. Excel won't automatically order the categories. If they are ordinal, you need to order them yourselves. Okay, so there are different types of bar graphs we can see. So with vertical bar graphs, we see the categories on the x-axis, okay, and then the count up the vertical axis. Okay, so vertical bar graphs are great for representing different values, but there's a limited horizontal space for names. And so because with vertical bar charts, there's not that much space for the category names, horizontal bar charts can be preferable sometimes because the names, the category names are given up the y-axis, and so longer category names can be listed without affecting the way the graph looks. We can also have more categories represented. Okay, so with a horizontal bar graph, the category names are up the y-axis, and then the counts up here horizontally along the x-axis. Okay, and then we've got double bar graphs, which are good if we want to do for comparison. So we can show between two different demographics how they measure. Okay. So just a little bit again about what bar graphs should look like. So for a vertical bar graph on the y-axis, we have the counts and we have a label of exactly what's being measured. Sometimes instead of it just being number of people, it could be money, it could be in thousands of dollars. So it's important to give the units there. Okay, the categories are given across the x-axis, right? And we see a label as well as the different category names. And so with the exception of when years are listed, those category names, again, should be qualitative. Okay. We also want to see a title. This title is not particularly the most descriptive, but we should see a descriptive title there. The next most common type of chart that we see, which again you'll have a chance to make in Excel and an activity later in this unit, are pie graphs or circle charts, depending on who's describing them. So the best pie charts, well, all pie charts need to have, again, that descriptive title appearing. Okay, and then the other pieces that we want to do is have our labels on the outside ends of our bar chart. Instead of having a legend or that sort of thing, this allows us to quickly see for a particular category what the label is. Okay, so not only do we see the name, we also see a count of the raw data, and then we see the percent that category represents. And at a minimum, we want to see the name and the percent, but having the count featured there is also good so that we can tell how many people were surveyed and what the total number of people surveyed for the creation of that particular pie graph was. Okay. So again, to recap, you want to avoid legends on your pie graphs. It makes it hard for people to track colors, and it requires looking around different parts of the graph to get the information that you need. And then always include the category name, the percent, and if you'd like, include the count as well. Okay. The next type of graph we want to talk about are time series or line graphs. So they're similar to our bar graphs that have time series, but they are created by taking data points and connecting them with lines, right? And so with our time series graphs, we always see time on the x-axis. Always. Okay. Our vertical axis, we want to see a label with units. Okay. And we always want to see a title on our graph as well. Okay. So a time series or line graph is typically used, again, for quantitative values. So we've got something being measured up the vertical axis and tracked over time. Our fourth type of graph, which you may not have seen before, is a box plot. We're going to spend some time drawing box plots by hand in a couple weeks. Okay, it's going to be covered in Module 7. Okay. And again, box plots are used to summarize quantitative data. Okay. We're going to have an axis label with what's being measured. This can either be vertically or horizontally. And then we're going to have the different categories of analysis. We could have a single box plot shown, or we can have multiple box plots shown on a single set of axes to allow for comparison. So this particular box plot shows information for across 6 different categories. Okay, we see our title always appearing for our box plot or any plot that we produce. So as we'll learn, one of the things that makes box plots great for quantitative data sets is it lets us quickly see the minimum of our data set, the maximum. It lets us see the median and mean, and it also lets us see any outlier values. It lets us see how spread out our entire data set is and how spread out the middle 50% of the data set is. Okay, so and don't worry if you've never seen a box plot before, you're not quite sure how to read them. We're going to go over that again in a separate module, but they are a really effective way of representing data and comparing data. Okay, so the final type of data we want to look at too are scatter plots with regression lines. You've had a chance to make a scatter plot in Excel already, okay, and a common statistical analysis, that's done is adding a line of best fit to a scatter plot. So on a scatter plot with regression line, we see the actual data points shown. So we see our actual data shown. And then we see that approximation that's allows us to then make inferences about where we haven't collected data from before. Okay, with a scatter plot, we're always going to see that title, that descriptive title appearing. Both our X and our Y-axis are going to be labeled with units because both of our variables we'd be investigating are going to be quantitative measured values. And again, what it lets us see is a relationship, if there exists, between two quantitative variables. So that introduces 5 of the most popular types of graphs that we see represented in journal articles and used to analyze data. It's really important when we make graphs. Again, some of the takeaways of how to have an effective graph is that we need to have descriptive titles always appearing in any of our visual representation. We also need to label all axes with units. And a key reminder too, as we start building new graphs in Excel, avoid the temptation for 3D perspectives or any distortion. Okay, and generally speaking, boring graphs are the best graphs because you're just representing the data as it appears. Okay, awesome. So hopefully that lets you think about some of the graphs you may have seen in a different way before. In the homework questions, there's opportunities to analyze and read from graphs. Okay. And in the final video series for this module, we'll look at building one type of graph by hand that you might not have seen before, a histogram. Histograms are similar to bar graphs, but a little bit different. We'll find out more in the next video. Stay tuned. Don't forget to email your instructor or attend office hours if you have any questions. Take care.